Welcome, everybody. My name is Nina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, because apparently there's 17 Ashlands in the world, or at least in the country. So I'm excited to be here for the second time with Carla Kelly, talking about her books and her writing and her thoughts about all kinds of interesting things. But before we get to Carla and my questions and your questions, I want to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. And I do want to thank Carla for letting us partner with other libraries, because when libraries get together, we just totally make magic. And so we've made this program happen. And so I'd like to welcome obviously the patrons from Ashland, but also from Lexington, Lunenburg, Marlborough, Marston Mills, Needham, Norwell, Quincy, Spencer, Tewksbury, West Newbury, and Woburn. It is so exciting to work with all of these wonderful libraries to bring quality programming to our Zoom room. So thank you for that, Carla. Thanks for letting us do that. And I want to let you know that we will be taking questions through the Q&A. If you have questions, please put them there. There's a button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says Q&A. If you want to say anything about anything chat-wise, do it in the chat, and I'll be paying attention to it, and I might even respond to you. But I will be taking questions from the Q&A. So, Carla, welcome. You are an icon of the romance genre, having written for many years.
And let's see, I'm 76.
No need to go into numbers. Legendary, Elizabeth says. But I just learned today, I started reading your Regencies, and I was like, oh, how did you start writing Regencies? And Carla told me she actually started writing Westerns. So let's start with a little bit about you, and then a little bit about your most recent book, and then we'll go right into questions.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I started with Westerns because when we lived in Wyoming, we lived close to Fort Laramie, and I became a seasonal ranger at Fort Laramie National Historic Site. And I had written a couple of short stories. I can't even remember the magazines now. Just kind of, not much of interest. And I mean, didn't take off. But when I was working at Fort Laramie, I discovered that so many of the people, of the women there, wanted to know what life was like at a fort for the women and children. So I thought, in my wisdom, why don't I write some short stories that do just that talk about lives of women and children at an Army garrison, and what they get. Post-Civil War Trans-Mississippi West. That's the big old historian term, and do that. And because I am a historian and I know Fort Laramie and the Indian Wars, I can make it really accurate historically, which really matters to me. I care about that, and yet be entertaining. So I wrote my first one. It was called Mary Murphy, and it's about a laundress, and it has been anthologized in other things. It hit a chord with people. It really did. So I was writing for can't recall the magazine now. It's been gone a while, but it was a big one back when I started this. This would be when 1975 or 6, and before a lot of you were born, I'm sure. And
was just a twinkle in somebody's eye.
Yeah, they did well. And so I kept doing that because I enjoyed it. Some were set at Fort Laramie, some were set at Fort Davis in Texas, and some other places like that. And and they started getting longer and longer. And because as I got more confident with writing, I felt good about that. So then I was in Santa Fe, can't remember the year, picking up a Spur Award from Western Writers of America for one of my short stories. And Santa Fe, there was a Pueblo Indian uprising there. And so I was trying to remember some of the incidents. And as I was on my way home, I flew home back to Ogden, Utah, where we lived then. I had this idea for a novel. So it is set in Santa Fe and the environs in 1680, when there was this rather impressive Pueblo Indian uprising, and it drove the Spaniards out for 13 years. And I got an agent, sold the story, and did okay. I had no name, and people hadn't read me much, and except my short stories. So then I had an agent, and after that one came out, I asked her, I said, Eileen, what should I do now? And she said, have you ever thought about writing a Regency romance? I said, well, I like Jane Austen and Georgette Heyer, but not really. She says, write me 4 chapters or 100 pages and I'll sell it. So I did, and she did. And that's when I started writing for Signet, my Regencies.
Mhm.
And I wrote 16, I believe, for Signet, and a bunch of short stories. I still like to write short stories. And so I kind of stumble into my career. What can I say? At the time, then I was home. We had some more children. We have 5 kids. I'm raising kids, trying to write. Nearly impossible, but you do it early and late.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what happened. And I've gone back to Westerns when I can, because I
Mhm.
like writing them.
Mhm.
And it's funny. I've also written for Harlequin. In fact, I'm working on one now for them. It's a Regency. And
Back to almost your roots.
yeah, they asked me. I said, yeah, why not? That's the history of my life. Yeah, why not? I'll try it. But finally, they let me write a Western, a novel. And it was the only time I've ever gotten to write something for Harlequin that I know a great deal about, because I got a master's degree in the Indian Wars, and I worked at Fort Laramie where I set the story. And the story, can you see this?
Yes.
Her Hesitant Heart.
Mhm.
The title, pardon me here, the title just sounds cheesy enough to appeal to Harlequin. No, we'll admit that. But it is a direct title. It is a direct phrase from an officer's wife's memoir of the Indian Wars.
Mhm.
But they wanted to change the title, and I'd been writing long enough, and I got really brave, and I said, hey, if you change that title, I will never write another book for you. And I meant it. I'd had it with, and so they kept the title.
Yeah.
And the book turned out very good. It's one of my favorites. Her Hesitant Heart.
Oh, remember that.
Yeah.
I want to go back to these original Westerns that you wrote. That would you characterize them as romances?
Well, there's usually now you got me. I'd have to look and see that generally they have a little love story, because out of all my Regencies, that's part of it, and readers tend to expect that.
Mhm.
One of my favorite experiences was a story that I wrote later called Borrowed Light. It's set in the West on a ranch in 1906, I think. And I was doing a book signing in Utah, and an old guy came up to my table there, and he looked like I knew he was a rancher. He looked like one. He looked at me, he looked down at his feet, and he said, just want you to know, I read your book and I liked it. So I guess it wasn't such a romance that it drove him away. But yeah, they generally are. I think all of them, all of those short stories. Yeah, Mary Murphy would be one that's about a laundress, and it's told from the point of view of a lieutenant. Well, he was a lieutenant then, and he was taking people west. They got on the train at Cheyenne. They were going up to Fort Russell and on to Fort Laramie. And he feels so inadequate because he's just out of West Point. And everybody's looking at him like he knows the answers to everything, and he doesn't. And I wrote that story and sold it. It's only about 8 pages, one of my favorites. But I never liked the ending. It was too flowery. So in 2004, I got a contract with Texas Christian University Press to consolidate these stories in a collection and sell them. And so I got out Mary Murphy again after 30 years. I've been thinking about that ending for 30 years.
Oh.
And all of a sudden I knew what to do. And I took out that flowery piece, and at the very end, I think it's it's 3 or 4 sentences that they aren't even full sentences. And that was it. And that was it. After 30 years, I had what I wanted, because when you read that ending, you realize, you suspect it all along in the story, but you realize just how much he cared for that woman. But he was an officer and she was a laundress, and nothing's ever going to happen. But those little sentences. So yeah. So I continue to think about how I can change stories, make them better if I get a chance to.
Right. Now, that to me is sort of almost your, I don't know, the lightning rod of what I loved about your books, because I said I started with the Regencies, is that they were not expected. They were surprising. They were regular people falling in love or having to deal with challenges. And so when you talk about your first Mary Murphy being about a laundress, that totally makes sense to me. So how did that happen, that where everybody else was writing about dukes and duchesses and stuff, how did you decide to be different?
Well, I've done some of those dukes and duchesses for sure. But yeah, like I said, I'm a historian. And if you look at anything about English history, there are not that many dukes in England.
Right.
Come on.
And they're really unattractive.
So I thought, so why don't I write about, and I thought consciously, why don't I write about more ordinary people? Because that's what I know are ordinary people. And Jane Austen wrote more about the gentry, yes, but they weren't all, not a lot. There aren't many dukes and duchesses in her books that I could even think of. So I thought, okay, I'm following a good pattern here. Jane's okay. In fact, the anniversary of her death was just, I think, yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I hope it was a peaceful death, what a lady.
Well, I want to dig into that a little bit, because I think that part of romance is to romanticize something. And so that's where we came up with the millions of dukes and duchesses and things like that.
It is.
So, but you really went on a different path. And I just have to wonder, what, yes, you have the history and the historian and stuff like that, but why did you think that would work?
I'll make a confession. I very seldom read Regency Romances. I very seldom read romances, really. But they're kind of required in my stories. And I get some critics say, hey, this is not a romance. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, to my way of thinking. Maybe and I like, so I don't know why I thought I'd get away with it, except that by then I think I developed a bit of a readership. And I'm such a naive person. I had an epiphany it's been a few years now, but a good example is actually, I'll drag it up again, this book. When I don't remember when it was, I finally noticed, and I mentioned it to my editor, I said, oh, my name is bigger now than the title. So I made that comment, and she kind of was a well, duh. Yeah, because they want to read a Carla Kelly book and not necessarily care what the subject matter is. So that was, I never even thought of that. It never occurred to me. But I just like writing about people that I'm more likely to know about personally, ordinary folks. And I like writing about surgeons, because I worked in a hospital more than once, and I worked for a hospice. And so I've always been interested in medicine. I see it from a modern point of view, but I see it from a historian's point of view. And I realized with a force, and I firmly believe this, some writers will not do it right. They say, oh, look at the kind of medicine he's practicing. Those men practice to the extent of their knowledge. Was it right or wrong? That's not really the issue with me. It said that they tried, and they practiced all they knew how to do. So, and that means a lot to me. And I think maybe there's an honesty in some of my writing, because that's kind of what I like to look at, is how people do things in the old times, yes, and how can I make that palatable to modern readers, And it seems to be.
It does. I mean, in the chat, everybody's talking about how it's important for us to feel like normal people can and do deserve love as well.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a billionaire. You don't have to be a duke. You don't have to own the ranch, any of that.
Nope.
So Another concept that is interesting to me is that a lot of authors will say, I write what I read, but you didn't read Regency. So like, how did you figure it out? Like what you were going to write and how you were going to write it?
Well, I started reading some.
Oh,
I think I think my editor, and back then it's been a while now, that Signet sent me some she thought I might like, and I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I can do this. But no, so that's what I did. But then I make a point. I really, honestly, I didn't want to be influenced by any of these Regency writers,
mhm,
so I would read them, but not to excess, because I had my own voice, my own way I wanted to say it. So yeah, I'll take their suggestions, and I can set a story during the Regency of what King George IV, as it turned out, he eventually became, um, and hence my own,
mhm,
and that matters to me.
mhm.
I don't really care what other writers think.
I love that about you. Because I think that from my perspective, because I am a bit older than that twinkle in the eye thing, is that you and Mary Bellog were both writing, I don't know if you know her.
I know who she is for sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's around the same time in turn, and she does write about more like dukes and stuff like that. But that you weren't writing bodice rippers. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Is like you know, you had both of you had a very, very different perspective on how people should treat each other. While the hot romances were really, you know, problematic looking back on them. So how did you avoid those tropes? Like how, I mean, just that's amazing to me.
Well, part of that, good question. Part of that's probably because of my religion. I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons, and that's a bit more than I want to put in print, just personally for
Mhm.
my own self. And so that's why really I figure I could have made a fortune writing some of these bodice rippers, but it never was something I was going to do. But
Yeah.
there's some colorful stuff in some of my, but I realize they aren't, you know, very explicit. I can't do that. Just,
Not just that, but you know, the characters are kind to each other. They respect each other, and you respect I mean, obviously you respect your characters. I remember reading Lord Ragsdale and just being floored. And anybody in the chat, have you read Lord Ragsdale? Let us know what you thought about it, because I was floored. Totally different from anything I've ever read.
really.
Yes. Because the heroine didn't save him.
No.
You know, like
Safe.
that's what all the books were saying, is that the heroine or the hero had to save each other in some way.
Yeah, they were both flawed characters. They each had their reason to hate the other one. But I've never been one to write these, oh, I hate you, I love you stories. Nah.
Mm,
So they had to kind of work around, because they had to deal with each other. They had no choice. She
mhm.
had no choice. And he was interested for whatever reason. And you know, that's funny. That book has been so popular, and I've always wondered why. It was never my favorite, but readers seem to really like that one. I guess that's it. You have two prickly people who finally figure out we've got to deal with each other. And the more they learn about each other, the more they like each other,
Mhm.
which is pretty much a lot of people are like that.
Right. It's more real to life that,
I think it is,
yeah.
as near as these can be, you know. But yeah, they were interesting characters. I have always enjoyed writing them.
So of your Regencies, which one was your favorite?
Oh golly, that's a rough question.
I know.
Something because hmm, it would probably be of that 16. I'm not sure I can give you an answer. Well, I can a little bit. Some have been reprinted recently, and one of those is Libby's London Merchant, which it was one of my early Regencies, and that was fun. I liked the characters. Again, there's a lot of trauma in this story, and they're fairly ordinary people. And there's a little deception going on for sure. And a lot of readers were convinced that I had her marrying the wrong guy. You know, spoiler alert, the clumsy doctor. But they really liked the other character who was a duke, if you'll recall.
I do.
Duke in there. And so then I had the opportunity after, and I never was one for sequels. And I'm probably getting way away from what your question was, but never was one for sequels. But I've after about 4 or 5 years, which is far too long, I realized, I thought I can do this. And part of the reason was by that I had written many books more, and I was a better writer. Because the subject in the next book, One Good Turn, which is the Duke's story, because as it begins when he's just mourning the loss of Libby, and he thinks he'll go back to drinking again, but he just can't. And he encounters a woman walking in the rain with her little boy, and she's a Spanish woman, and it brings him back to a very terrible time. And so that story is, I guess you read that one probably. It's a hard one. It's a tough story because I'm dealing with a bad time in the Napoleonic Wars in the Spanish Peninsula. But I knew I had the right couple now in this one. And I was a better enough writer that I could do it. So sometimes things have to marinate a bit before you can do that. And I realize that's hard to say sometimes, but it's true. But so I guess One Good Turn is probably one of my very favorite Regencies of all of them.
So you took that sort of every person type of story, and then you added just this angst. And that's what I guess I loved about Lord Ragsdale, was that he had to figure it out. So like having him have his own story, having to deal with all of his crap was just so good.
Well, the thing is, we all come with all that crap, and sometimes it gets in the way. Well, if it didn't get in the way of things, you wouldn't have a story. Well, somebody once said the perfect example of what a novel is you put your character in the worst place and get him out of it or her out of it. And think about it. That's true. The beginning of Pride and Prejudice. What's the rough spot? This woman's got to marry off 5 daughters. So you put them right in the middle of a bad spot. So that's kind of and that's where we find Lord Ragsdale. He's in a bad spot, and so is she.
He is, but that's, like when I think of Pride and Prejudice and the 5 daughters, that was very like typical issue of that time period of having to marry off daughters and the money and all of that stuff. But having to deal with alcoholism, I hope no spoilers, but
Once in a long time.
I think you've all read. Everybody here is a fan. That is just wasn't talked about, not in books, but in real life. So that's why for me it just really stuck with me.
And some of those people back then, if you read some of the histories and the old manifests of what people purchased, there was an awful lot of booze being consumed. and of course I don't drink. That's one of but I could imagine how he would feel. That's what I do. I try to put myself, how would I feel if I'd been through horrible experience and the only way I felt better was drinking? Yeah, I can see that. So I can have a lot of sympathy for him, a great deal, and I did.
I think it comes across. He's always sort of a sympathetic character, even when he's being kind of a jerk.
Oh yeah, and he was. He tries to proposition. Oh, poor Libby, and that's not the experience she wanted, and it wasn't his either, really.
No,
but he didn't know it at the time. She made it very clear.
Yeah. Now, did you do research on alcoholism for that book, or I mean, I know you know the history of the time.
Not specifically. I didn't. I just sort of thought this is how I would feel, and I knew enough about the stereotypes of drinkers, and it was just kind of fun there in the beginning. He's just so drunk that he he agrees to what is he agreeing to, and he goes, everything goes wrong. which so I played him really more for humor in a way until it gets desperate there when he wants that drink real bad.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
determined he won't. And yet all that was sugar coated. Usually it takes alcoholics 3 or 4 or 5 times to ever get, cold, stoned, sober. I do
Mhm.
know that from family members.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I thought it was amazing. So I'm going to ask some of the questions from people here. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A so that I don't lose track of them. Sandra asks, are your early stories in Here's to the Ladies? Is that the anthology you're talking about?
Yeah. Here's the ladies. That's one of them. This is one of the Texas Christian University Press. Here's to the ladies.
Mhm.
And then some of those were put into another anthology, but I added some additional stories and just chose a few from the others. Yeah, those are my, I call them my Fort Laramie stories because that's where it started. My whole writing business, really. I owe an awful lot to Fort Laramie. But yeah, that's kind of, those are my short stories.
Mhm. So Sam says, because you're a historian when writing, do you find you go to places to do research? And when doing research, what is something that you were surprised to learn or come across, if anything? Or your favorite thing that you came across?
Golly, when I wrote that series, which I don't think that many people read it. It's called the Spanish Brand series. It's set in New Mexico in 1780.
Somebody
And
did.
I had a son who lived down there near Taos at the time, and we went down to visit. And I thought, man, I love it down here. I can come down, do a little research, and I can make that tax deductible. I can visit my son at the same time.
Mhm.
But how things start interests me, and that one did, because I'd been reading a book. I was interested in the Spanish Southwest. See, I read stuff that I may never write about, but I was interested in the early days in the Spanish Southwest from that very first novel of mine. And I came across a footnote in one of these, and it said, in the absence of law, the juez de campo in a district becomes the man who provides law. And the juez de campo, you would translate that probably as brand inspector today. So that got me thinking, okay, in the absence of law, and this area where the story takes place, remember, you dump your heroine in a place where it's very dangerous, and then you get them out of it. That's a novel. So that became the basis for that. And then I did some more reading, just reading book research on that era in New Mexico. See, I don't really need to go places, because I write historical stuff that's not even there anymore.
Mhm.
So I can, but it's nice to see it, just to get a look if I can.
Mhm.
And I did down there in New Mexico for those stories.
Mhm.
And
Do you find
my
that-
Western stuff, the Fort Laramie stories.
Do you find that those places inspire you to really dig into their stories, like you did with Laramie?
Yeah, that's hard to say, simply because I think about writing historical fiction is you have a subject or an era you're interested in. Let's say the Indian Wars, 1854 to 1890, roughly. And so I do a lot of research on the Indian Wars for various reasons, for other things, including writing that thesis. And so, yeah, that gives me more information. And I've been to Fort Laramie and a number of other forts too. And I know what they're like, and I know what I can do to them or with them or for them. And yeah, so that's my interest. So you take an incident, like my book, I don't know if you read it, My Loving Vigil Keeping. It's a story about the Welsh coal miners. You take an incident of a mine disaster. It's like you have a hanger and you're putting a coat on it, and the coat is the mine disaster. So it's what you add to that that becomes your story, But so you have something ready made. I know I'm going to write about this mine disaster. So then I'm going to find everything I can about mine disasters and human nature of people, how people act in a crisis, or how I think they would act,
Wow.
So yeah.
Why don't you write nonfiction?
I have done some.
Okay.
Let's see, I did, let's see, when I worked at Fort Union for the Park Service, that's a fur trade fort on the, it is smack on the North Dakota, Montana border. The
Oh,
forts in North Dakota, the parking lots in Montana. And when I, there was a journal written by an Austrian, no, Swiss, Friedrich Kurtz. And it had been published in total by University of Nebraska Press, and they refused to reprint it because he was a true romantic, 1850s, and everything he would be writing about the Indians where he was working. He was a fur trader clerk at Fort Union. And then he would go off on a tangent about European art and so all that stuff. But I thought, I told my boss, let's do this. Let's take out all that stuff and just have the fur trade story. And then, so that's what we did. We took out all the stuff and all of it. In fact, that was published by University of Oklahoma Press. And the editor there said, this is great, because all of a sudden now we have a story about Indians and the fur trade and not all this stuff. So yeah, I got lucky. So I did that, and then I wrote a smaller thing about Fort Buford next door to it was Indian Wars Fort. So I've done just a tiny bit.
Okay. Well,
I don't have
Elizabeth says you actually wrote a textbook and a fab paper about privies as well, which we're always interested in.
It wasn't a textbook, but it's been put in various textbooks. Yeah, because when I worked at Fort, which one was it? Could have been Fort Laramie, maybe where it started. And I know Fort Union. Kids want to know where people go to the bathroom. They just do. And the Fort Laramie had what they call a sink. It's just that's what the Army called a privy. It was a building, and just kind of the adobe ruin, so we couldn't really interpret it. And the different houses had the officers all had they had privies behind them. So I just started doing a little research on that sort of thing. And the article I spoke about it several times, and it's been anthologized in various texts because people want to know where they go to the bathroom. I learned a lot, more than I ever wanted to know.
And yet we're still fascinated. Kitty says, I like your story set in areas controlled by the King of Spain before the Spanish-American War. American history does not cover those periods at all. What made you go there?
Oh, because I'm interested in well, maybe it goes back to that first novel of mine, Daughter of Fortune, which, by the way, I named something else, but the publisher didn't think that was sexy enough. So Daughter of Fortune, set in Santa Fe in 1680. And I just like looking at a place that's on the edge of change. And that's what you have when you have Spain. A lot of my undergraduate work was involved in Spanish colonialism. When you have an area on the edge of change, how do people deal with it? You've got the Spanish government. The government is becoming less powerful in Europe, which means they don't have time for their colonies anymore. And New Mexico was remote. So people, what they would do there, they would ask a question of the viceroy who was in Mexico City, which was 6 months away. And then he would take the question, send it to Spain, to the Council of the Indies, get a reply back a year later, then send his answer back to Santa Fe. And by then, these people had solved the problem because they had no choice. So what he would do, he would take that law, hold it over his head and say, obedezco pero no cumplo, which means I obey this law, but I can't comply with it. So that meant they could do what they wanted, essentially, because they had to. So that kind of fascinated me. And so I thought, these people are practical and they're cool. So I like to write about practical, cool people. That's what I did.
I love it. Well, you actually have some super fans in this meeting, because people are talking in the chat about different things. But also Kitty has a follow-up that your story, Courting Carrie in Wonderland, was great. I encourage the bookstores in Yellowstone to carry that book, since it covers such an interesting period of the park.
I did too. I tried to get him to cover it. I sent copies and he sent it to a place, it's called Yellowstone Forever. And in fact, if you readers listening to this want to send a letter about that, it's called Yellowstone Forever. They'll give you an address. Tell them you want Courting Carey in Wonderland in the bookstores there, because they didn't listen to me. But I think, and it's factual. My history's good. And yeah, I don't know why they didn't do it either.
Well,
it's a mystery to me.
make a campaign. Actually,
that.
Elizabeth is putting down some fighting words in the chat that she's your biggest fan and your favorite child. So,
Hi, Liz.
Lee says, I loved her hesitant heart, partly because we were stationed in the Army War College in Carlisle, PA. It made it extra enjoyable. Have you ever lived there?
I've been there. That I did some research there when I was in North Dakota. I was a ranger during the season, and then I also did contract research for the State Historical Society of North Dakota, and we got a buttload of money from what was the occasion? Oh, it was the bicentennial, Lewis and Clark, and I didn't deal with Lewis and Clark, but I was tasked with doing an infrastructure report on Fort Buford, which is at the confluence, so the Missouri, the Yellowstone, where the Lewis and Clark jumped off into the unknown, basically. And Fort Buford is famous 1881. That was where Sitting Bull surrendered. So they wanted me to study the buildings. So I was back there at the National Archives a couple times doing that, and then also at Carlisle, because Carlisle, that's where the Military History Institute is. And they have a wonderful archives there. So yeah, I've been to Carlisle a couple of times and I loved it. It's a nice area. So that was my interest there. And then when I did some research there and in the National Archives and came across funny exchanges between a surgeon and the captain. No, it was probably the adjutant, about the cows from the hospital getting out on the parade ground, causing a mess and a problem. And what are we going to do about it? And they exchange these very formal letters, and they're getting more and more irritated with each other. So I'm sitting there in the National Archives reading these letters, and I'm trying not to laugh because these are hilarious to me. And it turned into a story. It's in For This We Are Soldiers, and it's called Take a Memo, because these were memos. So yeah, I mean, I do my research like I'm supposed to, like a good girl, for the project, and I do. And it was a big project. But then I stored in my mind, okay, I got a short story here. I wrote that too. So I'm lucky that I can do that. And I've enjoyed that.
So we have about 20 more minutes. I wanted to kind of turn to what was supposed to be our topic today, about reprints. We wanted to talk about some of your books being reprinted and how that all happened. And, what is that experience for your readers? How should we take that?
That's a good question. See what happened when I wrote those 16 novels for Signet and a bunch of short stories in 2004. So when the ebook revolution began, I got permission to get my titles back, and some of them were reprinted by Cedar Ford and other publishers, and which was fine. But I left four with Signet, 4 of my books that I wanted them to have because, and I didn't totally understand what was going on either. When I got these titles back and they went to Cedar Fort, it's based in Utah, they wanted me to change some of the more what they thought was stuff, which really isn't much, but I did a little of it. Those 4, I didn't want them touched. I wanted them the way they were. So I left them with Signet, thinking they would continue printing them, and not just ebook, but also in paperback, whatever. They didn't. All they did was the ebook. So those final 4, we finally got permission to get the book back too. So because these are the early ones, some of those are just not around anymore because they're so early. So that's the deal. That's how we got the permission to do that. And so what we've done, the first one, as I said, was Libby's London Merchant, and One Good Turn. The sequel will be out in November. And then after that is, and this is one of my favorite books. It's called The Wedding Journey.
Oh,
Love this story. And that'll be out sometime next year. Then the last of those four is The Lady's Companion. I got a Rita Award for that one.
mhm.
But I realize the issue here is I don't ever want to fool my readers into thinking these are new books, because they're not. But hopefully they know them well enough, because those early ones, if you want it in a paperback form, they are very often not available anymore. They're paperback. They don't last forever. So yeah, that's an issue. And I know I remember one of my publisher wanted me to change the name of one of these books. I said, oh, there's no way I'm changing the name. I don't want them to buy that and think, oh, I've read this and I feel cheated. So yeah, I don't know. That's just, it's an issue. I don't know how other writers deal with it, but those are the last of my books that are being reprinted, as far as I know. But yeah.
So I'm going to make everybody here really jealous and say, I have all of your original signets. I bought them on eBay years ago, and I'm not parting with them. My kids are going to have to do something with them after I die, because I just find them so, like they're the originals, and yeah. So your fans are legion in that sense. So but it is curious when authors reprint their books, and how can the reader know that it's reprinted, a reprint? Like, there's a big sign across it? How can we know?
Good question. Trying to think I think you don't find out until you're inside, but luckily.
Wait a minute, Hillary's trying to up me by saying she has them in different languages. Fine, Hillary.
Yes, she probably does, actually. Oh, well, you don't find out until you turn it into the inside page. It says copyright 1991, one that came out. But that's the thing about Facebook. And I have a website, which I'm not very good at keeping up with, I admit, that I tell what I'm doing. And this book is coming out. I have pretty good readership on Facebook. This book is coming out, and it is a reprint. I try to tell people ahead of time. I really do, because it matters to me. I don't want to cheat anybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, usually they put a big banner across the front, said reprint the original or something, but
I haven't done that with these.
So none of these are original stories.
What you mean, the last four? Or the one I mentioned, Libby, and
all of the original ones that were signet, that were either done by Cedar Forge.
Yeah, no, the ones that have been reprinted, it's the same one that came out. For example, Cedar Fort did a bunch of them. They've done 10 of mine, but I don't know, it was never particularly an issue, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then let's talk about your more recent books, because the one thing that we didn't do was talk about when you went from Regency to Western, and then you went to World War II, and now you're in a different place again, or maybe back to Westerns. So what is going on?
It's just what I like. Like we move over here. We live in Idaho Falls. We're 90 minutes away from Yellowstone Park, and I thought, boy, I'd like to write a book about Yellowstone Park. So that I wrote Courting Carrie in Wonderland, which did pretty well, I think, but it really needs to be sold there in Yellowstone.
Yes.
But
well, there was a necklace.
I had all my research.
There was a necklace that was in the middle of that.
What was that?
You wrote the necklace, which was in the middle of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That one, I always wanted to write an epic. I wrote that one about 35 years ago, stuck it in a drawer, because I was, what I did, is that the one? It's kind of been doing this a while, guys, sorry. Western Writers of America I think that's the one, had a competition for a first novel. So I thought, I get this great. I just wanted to write. There is a theme here. The Spanish in the Southwest, Spain. I've always enjoyed Spanish history, so I wrote that as just I want to do this. It did. I think this is the one. I could be wrong here. It was a finalist in that comp. No, that was a different book. No, I just wanted to write that one. Now, my editor at Signet said they didn't publish it because she said it's half commercial and half literary. And I didn't even understand what she meant. I am not an English major. I took 2 English classes in college because I had to. But I didn't understand that, but I stuck it in a drawer. And then I got it out a couple of years ago and looked at it, but doggone, this is a pretty good story. And I did some, thanks to my editor at Epicenter Press, or a Camel Press. And I thought, okay, she dragged me kicking and screaming to some changes I didn't want to make, but she was absolutely right. So the story that came out is not the one I wrote originally. I learned a lot in the last, since I wrote that thing.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed that book. The Necklace. It's an exhausting story though. But the one that I did as my first novel, I called it Bright Sky, and it came out a couple of years ago as Her Smile. And yeah, that's that story about the Nez Perce.
Mhm.
And that was when I stuck in a drawer. And my oldest daughter, and Liz, I love this one too, even though you're you think you're the only one. My oldest daughter, we were in Yellowstone Park, and she said, "Mom, do you still have that book you wrote?" I said, "Yeah, I think I do somewhere." And so after they left, I went home and dragged it out, and I thought, this is a good story. And it'd been stuck in that drawer for 30 plus years. But again, like when I talked about the sequel to Libby's London Merchant, I needed some space. I was a better writer by the time I looked at Her Smile again,
Mhm.
because I had learned far more about the Indians. I knew far more about the U.S. Army out west, had all my research, and I changed it. So I didn't have, all I have is a manuscript copy. So as I rewrote it, as I retyped it, I rewrote it.
Mhm.
And now it reflects more accuracy about the Indians. And also because I learned a lot about writing in between. So yeah, it's a continuing, every book I write, I learn something,
Mhm.
everyone, because it
Well,
never ends.
that's kind of curious because you said that there were the 4 books that just recently got reprinted that
Yeah.
you chose to not change them whatsoever.
Yeah,
So,
and
uh,
I haven't had to change them much. I noticed that with One Good Turn, the sequel to Libby's London Merchant, very few changes,
mhm.
because I had that length of time between the first one and the second one, and it was enough.
Mhm.
And the Wedding Journey, I didn't change that at all. Didn't need to change.
Mhm.
And same with the one coming out, the Lady's Companion. I just wanted them left the way they were. And because they're a little more explicit in some areas, which my other publisher would have gone, oh. So I didn't want them touched. So they're coming out pretty much as they were.
That's awesome because I think that there's something to be said for keeping that the thing that I remember, from reading the originals, as it is. You can change the cover and you can change the font or whatever, but like the story is the thing that sticks with you.
Oh, yeah.
So Lee says, any update on the newest installment about the Master 6 stories?
Oh, yeah. I was only going to write 3. I was sure that when I end that story with the Battle of Trafalgar, I mean, what else is there? Because I saw, spoiler alert, he comes to know more about who his parents were, finally.
Mhm.
But my readers said otherwise. They said, oh no, we need another book, this time more about the gun wharf rats. So that's book 4. And I wrote that, I finished that about 2 months ago. And that'll be out sometime in the spring. I'm not sure exactly when. But yeah, it's a story that involves, it also involves Abel Six and Meredy, because everybody they're a great couple. And they're just, there's this genius wandering around the world, and he's controlled, thank goodness, by a woman who's so normal, because he needs that. I have a niece, I think, who's probably a genius, and I've watched her through the years, and it's the simple stuff that baffles her, the hard stuff. So anyway, so he's a wonderful character. But we have 2 of these gun wharf rats. One has, at the end of the 3rd book, he's going to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. that was the premier medical school in Europe, and it's still very way up there. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take his story and see what happens to him when he goes up there. And that, so yeah, that's the fourth one, and that is going to be the final one. Because I hope it is, because I do want to write some other things. But yeah, I like to never say never. I mean, he could show up in a short. I mean, some of the Gun and Wharf Rats might show up in short stories or Able Six, because when you get a character like Able Six and his wife, they're just, I just love them. And one thing else I've done in Regencies that I think a lot of Regency writers don't do, and my later ones in particular, they end them at the wedding. No, the fun goes on when you go on beyond the wedding.
Mhm.
What's life like for the first year for these people, and so on like that. So that's what I enjoyed about Able
Mhm.
Six and Meredy. We want to know more about them.
Yes, especially because in a lot of books, the courtship is pretty short. You know,
Yeah.
it's almost like this insta love thing, and you want to know that they actually can make it.
Mhm. Yeah. So that to me is a lot of fun.
So maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe things change for you depending on the book, but what comes first for you? The setting or the characters or the plot?
It's usually the setting, the historical event
Mm-hmm.
comes first. Like Spain in the Southwest, when Spain was losing all control and the Comanches were becoming more powerful. That, and then I think, okay, let's have a man who runs owns an hacienda out here in this dangerous area, and he's the brand inspector for the whole district. And let's say he goes away on a brand inspection tour and comes back, and his wife and two children are dead from cholera. And he comes home to nothing but death. But he has one little dog that keeps his feet warm at night. Well, the dog finally dies, and so he says, I got to get another dog. So he goes to Santa Fe, and that's where he meets his next wife. So yeah, it's the event. The Scoville mine disaster. Okay, how do I want to tell a story about a mine disaster? I want to invest my readers in the people in that mine and their families and their connections, so that when that mine finally blows, we really feel like it because we're there with them. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's the event to me. And then I on my little hanger, I have my event, and I stack on the characters, and the plot and characters to me just come together.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's how I do it. Like I say, I guess I never thought I'd end up writing like I stumble into stuff, and writing sure was fun. It's hard
Mhm.
though. It never gets easy. Never. I write chapter one, I think, oh, I got to write 350 pages. And but the thing is, and any writer will agree with me, any novelist, you can. That makes all the difference. I know I can do it.
Yes, because you've done it.
Yeah. So I keep telling myself when it gets rough, okay, you can do this because you've done it.
Am I reading this right that you don't outline your stories?
I do.
Oh, you do?
I outlined them rather heavily. And I learned that when I was working on my master's degree. My subject of my thesis was Robert Utley, who was a premier historian of the Indian Wars, one of the first. He passed away last summer, and I'm still sad about it. He was well into his 90s, I think. And I asked him in the course of writing my thesis about him, I asked him how he did it. And he said he always outlined what he thought would happen in each particular chapter, the event. In his case, it's history. And and I realized I've been doing that too. What I think is going to happen in this chapter. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 sentences, sometimes it's longer. And so that gives me, I don't write by the seat of my pants. Never been one of those. Occasionally I do, but not often.
Mhm.
I want an outline because that gives me something firm to work with. And that's partly based on the fact that I write history too. I
Mhm.
want to know what I'm doing. So
What do you think has been the most significant historical thing that's happened that you've written about?
the one that made the most impact on readers was the story about the Schofield mine disaster. Um, for the audience, I wrote it for the way I felt about it, because I interviewed some miners. I mean, this, this thing happened in 1900, but I interviewed some miners, and I got real involved in the lives of these people. There, many were Welsh, French, German, a lot of Welsh, British Isles, and it just struck a chord with readers. And they told me about this. I was speaking about the book at a historical society meeting up there in, near where the mine disaster took place. And when I finished my talk, answered questions, I was packing up and getting ready, and 4 big burly guys came up to me and said, "Oh no, what's this?" And one of them said, "We want you to know that we are Farishes." That's one of the names of some of the people that died, "and we still mine." It got me right. I just started to cry. So that really affected me, because this affected them. So that in particular, but beyond that, it would probably be the Royal Navy and the Napoleonic Wars at sea. Because this is not an area, well, there are a lot of people, Pat O'Brien's written up, Patrick O'Brien, and of course, C.S. Forrester, the biggies. But I thought, I can do this too. And I do it, and I do it from a slightly different angle. I'm working on one right now where he's involved in the blockade, which was soul sapping. You're going back and forth and trying in and out of there in the British the Channel, and people get careless. And this fellow's a surgeon, and they hurt themselves, and this kind of, it's just grinding, and how to do that and still make it something people want to read. We'll see. But yeah, probably the Napoleonic Wars at sea. They mean a lot to me. My dad was in the Navy.
The connection. Geneva says that they went and visited the Huntington through the mining area, and it added wonderful poignancy to your stories. And I think for me too, that's very true. Like if I can see a place that you've written about, it brings it really the story to life, which is just a gift, really, because when
you go to that cemetery in Schofield and you look at all those headstones, and they have the same death date. That does something to you.
Yeah,
it just does. And I'm sure Geneva will agree with me on that one. Yeah,
it certainly brings history to life in a way that it's accessible to us. Otherwise it can be too horrifying to read it straight out as if it was
or it can be too much. You got to know. I try not to slap it on with a trowel, the history, because I always try to remember what Elmore Leonard said, one of his wonderful things. He said, "Remember what you're writing. You're writing about people, and keep that always in your mind." But to do both, it's I've learned how through a lot of trial and error too.
I think you're an expert. So we're actually out of time. It's 8 o'clock. It just flew by. So much fun. Thank you so much, Carla, for doing this again. Liz, thank you for all of your backroom information.
I'm scared to ask her.
I am going to be on email in a little bit, maybe tomorrow, and be like, "Hey, can we do this again?"
I'd be happy to. I enjoy it.
Thank you. Maybe when your next book comes out. But everybody, thank you for being here. Carla, you're just wonderful and amazing.
Well, Mina, I got to meet you in person because I think we're going to be great friends.
I think so too. My guest room is always available to you.
Thank you.
And you can bring Liz or any of your favorite children. It'll be fine.
My favorite children. Okay.
All of them.
All 5. Okay.
All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
Bye.